Entrevistamos a Dehaene, quizás el científico más importante del mundo en neurociencia cognitiva. Y vamos a hablar de todo aquello que nos hace humanos. Well, Stan, it's my great pleasure to be here now with you in this interview. You were my mentor first. That's how we started, which is, of course, in science, a very strong relation that gives long-lasting bonds, I think, forever. And then we've been friends and collaborators, and we've navigated science and aspects of life together. So now being here in this interview is very, very special and very nice thing to do for me.
It is for me too, actually. It's a great pleasure.
We hope it's going to be good also for the public. And so, first thing I'd like to do is to try to understand how you're a bit of a pioneer in what you've done, in many things, in the science you've done, in the techniques you've done, in the ways you've analyzed things. And also I like to think of you a bit as a Renaissance man. And so maybe the first question I'd like to ask is, within our existing disciplines, if you had to define yourself, how would you do so?
That's a wonderful question. I don't know. It's a very strange discipline that we are in. I mean, I was trained as a mathematician, and I think that played a big role in my orientation. I really love science, and I love the ability of mathematics to capture some reality. But I became then a psychologist. I have a PhD in psychology. And eventually, I think what I do is mostly neuroscience, or cognitive neuroscience as we call it, which is the study of the brain and how the brain performs computation. So I'm not sure who I am. In the course of my career, I've been doing rather different things. Initially, I started to study patients at the hospital, patients with brain lesions. This was the only way, actually, at that time, that we had to put in relation psychology and the brain through the existence of lesions. But then I became a specialist of brain imaging, because these were the new techniques that allowed us to see the brain. So I don't know who I am, but I just love the field that we are in, because precisely there's a lot of diversity in what we do.
You're known in the community as one of the founders of the neuroscience of mathematical cognition, how we understand and create mathematics. My understanding is that all of these things are actually very important to what defines us as humans, and so I think that there's something on top of all of that which might be, I'm trying to guess, but a motivation for you. And so this is my question: what makes us humans?
This is really the $1 million question for our field, right? There is something quite particular. I call it the human singularity. I think there's something quite singular about the human brain, in particular, that allows us to acquire language, but also not just the language that we speak right now, but an internal language that allows us to do mathematics, for instance. And probably goes way beyond just spoken language and mathematics, but also includes incredible abilities of humans to develop tools, or to develop theories, especially theories of other minds, what we call theory of mind. So this is really the question I would love to answer the most, I think, is exactly what defines the human brain. We know that there have been experiments in the 70s where people were adopting a chimpanzee in their homes, a baby chimpanzee, and hoping that somehow with the appropriate environment, the chimpanzee would acquire a language. We know now it was a completely misguided idea. It never worked. There is something in the human genome that makes us completely unique in our ability to acquire information. And that is also very important, because it means that we cannot be empiricists. The brain is not just absorbing knowledge from the outside. The brain is at least as much a sort of top-down system that imposes knowledge on the outside world.
Stan, and we were speaking about being human, and of course you spoke in plural about what it is to being human, but we are all aware that we are all a bit different, and in particular in one domain which I think you've worked so much, which is mathematics. We see a lot of variability, or at least that's how it feels, that there's some people that really like it, some people that don't like it, some people that seem very easy to them, some people that really struggle onto that. Why are we so different, and what have we learned from neuroscience that may, for instance, help the people that struggle more with math to do better?
Well, I think actually that we tend to exaggerate our differences. We pay a lot of attention to individual personalities, and that's how we are as human beings, but in fact we all have roughly the same brains. And one of the things we've discovered is that we all have a certain talent for numbers and mathematics right from the start. As when we are babies, all babies born with a normal human brain, that is to say 95, 99% of babies with normal development have a sense of number. I think your question is a very legitimate one. Why is it that only some of us build from that towards higher mathematics? I fear that it is primarily a question of getting the proper education and education to curiosity. So the thesis that I've been defending is that every child can learn to love mathematics.
And do you think that something that you've learned in your science can guide us on what would be the good way to teach mathematics, so that instead of becoming something that it's a struggle for many, many children, it becomes something that's more pleasant and more effective and works better?
Well, it's a big question. I don't think we're quite there yet, but I have a few ideas. So we know that we start in life as babies with a sense of mathematics which is quite concrete. It's about real objects. It's about, as I say, the sense of space and navigation. So my feeling is that mathematics becomes much easier if we relate the abstract objects of mathematics to more concrete representations. I'll take a very simple example. The abacus that many Asian countries use to teach number is a wonderful tool to teach number, because you have very concrete sense of number in a sense, right? The numbers are represented by movable objects. The sense of movable objects and sets of movable objects is something that all babies have. So I think there is a general message here. You can teach mathematics in an extremely abstract manner, and then it becomes very difficult. Or you can teach mathematics by relating it to the concrete objects for which it was designed in the first place. And then it becomes something that draws upon your intuitions. And then my impression is that all children benefit from this sort of building up on intuition.
Let's move out of math for a while. You were saying before that what makes us human somehow is this language that allows us to do many different things. It's not a language of words, but it's a language of thought. Is music a language?
Oh, that's so interesting. So there are structures in language. Sorry, there are structures in music, I mean. It's not really a language in the sense that it's not so clear what's the content that you are communicating, although you could argue that there are contents of emotions flowing or metaphors, images. But the most important, I think, is there is a structure in music. And when we do experiments, we find that the structure of music partially activates Broca's area, which is also for the structure of language, or syntax of language. So there is an overlap between music and spoken language structures. But I think there is also a lot of mathematics in music. For instance, there are powers of two. When you look at musical notation, the duration of the notes goes by powers of two, or more complicated schemes. So it's very interesting. I think music is making use, or recycling, this is the word I'm using, it's recycling some of the structures of language, and it's also using some of the structures of mathematics.
Isn't it the other way around? So was there, in the history of humanity, language came first or music came first? What do you think?
We don't know. I think we don't know. My personal theory is that all of these are a consequence of something particular evolving in the human species. A workspace system in the brain with the ability to create combinatorial representations, to combine mental objects. And as a consequence of that, we have language, we have mathematics, we have music, we have complex tools. All of these appear together in human evolution. That's my bet, that we are going to find that there's been a major change that affects all of these domains. But you know, it's everybody's bet. We don't know at the moment.
So music, math, reading, I mean, all these different aspects of human cognition. I understand that you were a mathematician and that you were interested in the human brain and the human mind, maybe even more than the human brain. And so you started working on numerical cognition and trying to understand how we create math. But then came consciousness, reading. How did this happen? How did you make it to be such a proliferous researcher of the human mind?
I don't know. I think maybe I have too much curiosity. I get very interested by small questions that I think we can answer experimentally. What I love about our field is we can take a question that's a very big question and turn it into a focused experiment that we can bring to the lab. So that's what I love to do, and I'm intrigued by questions in all sorts of domains. So I started to work on consciousness a little bit by chance, because we were doing experiments on words, on reading, and I realized that there could still be some activation of the brain circuits for reading when we flash the words so briefly that they are not conscious. We can really flash a word on a computer screen, and especially if there is a shape after it that serves as a mask, then you no longer see the word. You only see the mask. You have a feeling you haven't seen anything, and yet we can show that there's been activations in your brain in the reading circuitry. So it's through this small angle that I began to be interested in consciousness, and it's been the same throughout my career. I was intrigued by this phenomenon, and I started digging in and reading a lot about it.
There was one companion that you had in your lab while you were doing your PhD. She became your colleague and partner, and then much more than that, your girlfriend and your wife and the mother of your children. Yeah. And you've had this, I think, a very unique, not unique, but very interesting, I'd say, experience of that probably your closest collaborator in science, with whom you've done an amazing amount of science together, is also your partner in life. Mm. How does this work? I mean, bringing
I don't know.
the questions home. Do you never stop speaking science? Is it always there?
Well, I don't know, but let me say a few words. So my wife, Ghislaine, is a pediatrician. She came to the lab because Jacques Meller, the whole team working on the baby's mind, and that's what she continues to do. She specializes in the baby's brain and baby's mind, how it's organized, and I do most of my work in adults, although I look also at children in the domain of education, let's say. So that's how we split the work in the family, and of course, anytime there is a funny question, I get excited, so we discuss a lot about science at home, but not just that, of course. We have a lot of different interests. And I think, anyway, for both of us, science is just so exciting. We don't feel that we are working all the time. Maybe sometimes, there is a bit of workload, but mostly it's about fun ideas and trying to find new ways to attack them.
Could you remember these moments that would be like, Messi scoring his big goal in the final, or that have been really very specific moments, but not concepts, one day at 1 hour in one very moment in which something happened that gave you like a strong joy or a feeling of strong pleasure?
Many times.
Could you point to one of them?
I think that's, that's what drives us as scientists, is we have these moments where suddenly we feel we understand something, or on the contrary, sometimes we have this fact that is so surprising, that we realize it's very important. So yeah, several moments, I don't know. My first patient, I went to the hospital because I was called by a doctor friend who said, this patient you should see has a problem with numbers. And at that time I was working on how the numerical mind is organized. I was working on how we calculate, and I had this idea that there are two systems, one that does exact calculation and the other that does approximate calculation. So we can approximate. If I tell you 23 plus 11 is 96, you don't have to calculate. You immediately know it's false because it's way too small or the result is way too large. So I had this idea, but I didn't know if it was true or false. It was just a sort of idea that I had. I went to the hospital, and there was this guy who had a complete dissociation, and I realized that in 5 minutes. He couldn't do 2 plus 2. He had no idea what 2 plus 2 was. He didn't know it was 4, but he knew he could not be 9, and because 9 was too far off. And this guy, I realized test after test in one afternoon, just in a few hours, I realized that he had the approximate system preserved, but the exact calculation system impaired. Okay. Well, I don't know why I get excited about this, but for me it was an extraordinary moment to realize that what I had been dreaming of, here was the proof, you know, in one particular patient with a particular brain lesion.
And it was strong enough that you remember it many years after that.
Yeah,
You still remember that very vividly.
Maybe the scientist's mind is a bit particular because we get so excited about things that maybe other people would not get excited. But all my life I was excited by funny aspects of the mind like this. And, other instances, like when brain imaging appeared, one day we begin to realize that every single person who can read has activation in the same place in the brain. It's about here in the back of the brain. And every time you read a word, we see activation in that spot. And we take another person, and another person, and another person. And we realized that there was a sort of reading-related area. It was a speculation at that time, but then we did experiment after experiment. And so, for instance, we scan people who haven't learned to read, illiterate people who just didn't go to school. We compare them with people who have learned to read, and hop, it's the same exact spot again. Each time I see this spot, I get so happy, you know, that we have this very simple fact that we could understand.
Is the brain a computer?
Well, I think the most important advance of the 20th century was to understand that the brain is a system for processing information, and that information can be processed in a material system. This is a great advance of, let's say, Alan Turing, John von Neumann, Shannon. This idea of information in a material system is something we're still developing now in the 21st century, and we realize that the brain is a coding system. It's coding information, compressing it, coding it in ways that can be manipulated materially. So the brain is not really a computer, it's an information processing device. It's not a classical computer. For one thing, it has you know, billions of processing units. We can argue whether the processing unit in the brain is the neuron or maybe it's the synapse, but there are billions of them. So it's a massively parallel system. We're still discovering the properties of such a computer.
So we process information, but we also create information in a way. And I think that one beautiful example of this, which I think should be also interesting to understand consciousness, and which in a way it's not the principal way of observing our behavior, is dreams. During the night we are not working, we are in the bed, but yet our minds are making the most extraordinary conceptions. What can we learn about consciousness by observing our dreams?
Well, for one thing, we understand that the brain can generate extraordinary representations. It's exactly as you said. We're carrying in our brains the entire world. We don't have to wait for external inputs. We can be in total darkness and the brain can still generate these remarkable representations. The science of dreams is only beginning, I think, but there are already some remarkable advances. For instance, there are colleagues in California who have been able to decode what the person is dreaming about just by looking at the brain activity. You put someone in the fMRI, you let them sleep and have a dream, wake them up in the middle of that, and you can decode what they are going to report as the content of their dreams based on the pattern of brain activity before they wake up. I find this absolutely extraordinary, that we are finding more and more correspondences between brain activity and the content of consciousness, even in the complete absence of external stimulation.
So we dream during the night, but we also dream during the day.
We can say we dream reality in a certain sense, right? We impose structures on very small inputs from the external world.
What about newborns and infants? We don't know what they think because, well, at least not easily, because they cannot tell us with words what they're thinking, but can we use this science to understand what is in their minds and whether they have some consciousness that may be similar to ours, to the adult consciousness?
Totally. I think this is one of the most exciting areas of science. We used to think of the baby's brain as very disorganized. And for instance, for a long time there was this idea that the frontal lobe of the infant is just not activated. It will only be activated maybe after 8 months or 10 months of life. And we now know it's completely false. In fact, what we see is a highly organized brain right from birth with all of the long-distance connections in place. And these connections may be slower, but they are functional. So they are bringing the information into what looks like exactly like the workspace we see in human adults. In fact, we've made experiments looking at masked faces. Instead of words, we use faces because, of course, words would not make much sense in the infant, but infant can see a face, and what we found is that there is exactly the same sort of pattern of brain activity as in the adult. The only difference is it's about 3 or 4 times slower. So the infant needs a lot of time to integrate the information, but eventually it gets into this frontal cortex, it gets into these long-distance circuits, and we think that they have the signatures of consciousness. Now, we don't really know when it starts. We've seen that the earliest age we've seen it is 2 months, and 5 months for these very clear signatures. It's difficult to measure, but my bet is that it's there right from the start, right from birth. And there is this very interesting speculation that maybe birth is the first moment of consciousness. It's a great thing, to ask what is the first moment of consciousness. It's a machine, and at some point it's got to turn on and will generate consciousness. I suspect that it could well be the moment of birth. It's a moment where the brain is being changed dramatically, liberated from all of the neuromodulator systems that are turning in the womb, and therefore suddenly we see highly structured brain activity. That is, I think, a question for the future, but the immediate future, it's a question we will have an answer to in the next 5 years, I think.
This is good because that's exactly where I wanted to go, to the future. So throughout our conversation, you've mentioned, not with too much detail, but you've many times mentioned the capacity that we have now to read and to infer thoughts by looking at brain activity. So you mentioned we can decode dreams. You mentioned we can even know what's the content of the mind of a baby that cannot speak, and what's he's thinking, or what's the quality of his or her consciousness. We know about the unconscious, even more of the mind of a person that he can access with his own introspection. All of this seems like we may be seeing very different things in the near future in our ability to understand ourselves, to understand the others, to understand our dreams, our unconscious. So let's now to go I would like to try to take you to more concrete examples of something like where science fiction may be science. So let's play the game the following way, like movies. So one that I know, Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind, where it's a movie where someone has a memory and goes to a factory where this specific memory of this person, which was a love story, is erased. Is this possible not now, but maybe in a few years? It's conceivable that we will be able to have a technique that I can go somewhere and tell someone, please erase this memory.
Well, it's not going in my lab, but I know that there are some labs that are able to destabilize emotional memories. It's a real problem in the clinic because you have people who have been traumatized, for instance, by a war experience, and they are haunted by these experiences, and you would really like these memories to go away. And there are some experiments that suggest that this is possible, that you can interfere with the stability of these memories. If you understand what stabilizes memory, you can also destabilize the memory. So yes, I think that's within reach. Maybe not tomorrow, but in the next decade, I would think so. So
Stan, here's my last question. Neuroscience now here in Argentina, but I guess all over the world, is very trendy. But at the same time, it's funny because it's not so easy to study because it's not a traditional discipline. It's not like mathematics or physics or engineering or law that you just go to that school. It's a combination of many things. So if you were to talk, as you're doing now, to one of these many teenagers that is listening to you with enthusiasm and wants to go through this path of doing neuroscience, what would your advice be on what should they study? What's the path of education to be a good neuroscientist?
Wonderful question. Yeah, I wish I knew. I think there is an enormous diversity. So the first thing I would say is you can be yourself. We need engineers, we need physicists, we need mathematicians, we need neurologists, we need psychologists. We even need philosophers a little bit, although I think their place is diminishing in our field. So there is a lot of diversity that we could use. I would say read a lot. There's a lot we know already, and by reading you can absorb. And it's as any field of biology, there's a lot to know about the anatomy of the structures and also the experiments that have been done already. But I would also say don't read too much. Be creative. You know, there's so many experiments to be done. It's a bit, as you say, it's a bit trendy and people all go in the same direction. Everybody studies working memory or one specific aspect of reading or number. And you know, the field of what the human brain does is so enormous that you can be enormously creative in this field, I think.
Okay, Stan, thank you so much. It was a wonderful conversation, and it was a luxury and a pleasure to be able to have the opportunity to be here now with you.
My pleasure. Thank you so much.